Thanks, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everyone, for coming virtually as well.
Just double check that they can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Great. So, yeah, today we're going to be talking about and looking at error-aware scripting approaches and techniques. I want to thank Eric and Vince for giving me the opportunity to speak here. It's the first presentation I've done in a long time, and I've really been meaning to do something along these lines for a long time, so that was a great opportunity. And everyone at Beeswax has been really encouraging, and yeah, especially Jay and Julian, so I just wanted to put that on record. Before we get started, just a little about me. So I've been developing in FileMaker for about 10 years, certified in versions 12 and then a bit of a break, came back in for 16 to 18. My time in those 10 years is fairly evenly split between in-house development and product development. And I've been in Beeswax as a FileMaker developer since July this year, so I'm still pretty new. And my work on error handling has kind of been ongoing since around 2014. And just a little bit of background there, it came mainly through the product development side. If you ever worked on a product, you'll know that support is a big part of it. I was working simultaneously in support and development on the same product, so I was seeing the pain of the support team, but they tried to desperately troubleshoot issues that just kind of were subtle or would only happen occasionally. So yeah, we all used to have to do screen shares or even send files between the support team and the clients, and it was a big hassle. But because I was on the development team as well, I could do something about it. So that's when I started exploring error handling and working on it. So this is kind of everything I've learned in those 5 years. It's absolutely still a work in progress because I still think this is a new area in the FileMaker space. So I'm really just trying to get some ideas out there, hopefully start a conversation about where this could go. If you want to contact me after the Prezo, my email address is there. Beeswax, be happy to talk error handling or anything FileMaker, really. There's some references for this talk. They're very old, but still pretty good. So the FileMaker standards site, which some of you are probably familiar with, has a proposal on error handling from way back in 2011. That's just a very short but quite succinct definition of what error handling is, quite useful to read. And there's also a kind of more fully fleshed out implementation by Dan Smith, who some of you probably know, from 2013. And all the principles in that are fairly sound. There's some really interesting discussion in that on those pages. So if you're interested in general in error handling, I'd definitely check it out. That site doesn't always work, so keep trying it if it doesn't work for you. And it does mention, it's pre-JSON functions, so there is a little bit out-of-date stuff, but I strongly recommend checking these out. Okay. And so before we get, there's a lot of kind of theory in this, because again, error handling is still at kind of ground level in FileMaker. But I did want to start with a kind of illustrative example of how error handling might come about in a system or the need for it. So I'll try and burn through this pretty quick. Go to, come on. There we go. Go to the screen, which is, yeah. Okay, so just imagine a system, super simple system. And this is a contact management system that you built for a client. It's super simple. All it really does is display and store contact info. The only real script it has is this show active contact script. It's all working fine. Now, then imagine that you are asked to add some validation to this email address. So I'm sure you've all done this sort of thing before. You'll want it to essentially not allow valid emails to be saved to the database. So let's show how we might do this. It's kind of all pre-baked and very basic. So we're going to add a little visual cue to show that there's an error. And we're going to add a script trigger. Again, there's a million ways you could do this in a production system. It'll probably be better than this. But I've pre-made a script called validate email address that will work for us here. And you'll see that now if we try and put in an invalid email, don't ask about what the validation is because it's super basic. But yeah, we put an invalid email, we just get stuck in the field, right? If we put a valid email in, we're good to go. So that's our kind of innovation we've added to the system later for the client. And they're happy with it. Everything's good. But then they come to us and say they found a weird issue with the system and essentially some of their contacts have gone missing. And they freak out because that's what clients will do when data seems to be missing. It's fair enough. It could be important data. Obviously, in this case, it's just junk, but it's not the point. So what they're saying is they are missing contacts. Now, luckily, you can at least show them the contacts aren't missing. They can just show all contacts. And the one they were worried about, Amos Roy, is in the full list. So something has gone wrong, though, because when you click on Amos, you'll see they're neither active or inactive. Now, as a developer, you can see in your admin layout pretty quickly what's happened here, right? You'll see that instead of active, it's now equals active. Now, that will instantly, because you wrote this system, give you a clue about where the error is. You'll be like, okay, my find active contact script uses that pattern, equals active. But, of course, that's only going to work, that's only supposed to do anything in find mode. So you can figure out, right, that something's going wrong. This script is running when they're not in find mode, but you don't necessarily know why. So now let's say that the client gives us a bit of a clue, a bit of a help, and tells us that it was when making a change to an email address that they saw this problem. And then that makes you think, okay, if they're making a change to an email address, then that's got to be something to do with my email validation. And then sure enough, after a bit of testing, you can figure out that if you happen to be in an invalid email state and you hit this button, then bam, your active goes away and you've got an issue. Yeah, but the user, when they hit that, probably hasn't seen that change because at the same time, the email icon comes up saying you've got an invalid email. So their eye is like, okay, let me fix this email address and I'm good to go. But then when they log in again, they're going to not see this contact because they're not active.
Misdirection.
Yeah, you see, it's a subtle error. So that's the problem you're trying to solve. And now imagine this in a realistic system. You can fix the issues, right? You can set all those contacts back to active really easily, but now you've got to stop the problem recurring. That's when you can turn to error handling. And I think this is a lot of way developers get into error handling, right? It's reactive. They find a problem, it costs them a client or it costs them some time, and then they try and get into it. So I'll just show you kind of the most heavy-handed, this is not a best practice, but the most heavy-handed way you can solve this. Essentially, that was strange. Oh, I see. Essentially, a error checked script. So there's the original, right? It just went burned on through no matter what was happening. And then this one now has some simple error checking. So you'll see here, after every step, it checks for the last error. If there was an error, just gets on out, right? No messing, straight out there. And just to confirm, this error no longer occurs, right? We'll just quickly zoom through with the script debugger, and you'll see exactly what's happening. So if we happen to hit show active contacts now, you'll see there that triggers our on-object exit, and we don't leave the field, but because there was an error, error 20, we will exit the script, and that way the active doesn't get updated, and the user, you know, they can just continue and nothing has happened, and then hit the put the right email in.
Sorry, distracted. Could you repeat that?
Do you want to see the script debugger again? Okay. So The problem before was that if you hit the show active contacts whilst you had an invalid email address, you'd have an error which would set your active field to == active. Now we have the error checking in place, the very not best practice error checking. You'll see that the attempt to enter find mode will trigger the on-object exit, so the email validation. So that's a triggered script. That script will run as usual, but it will exit with false because the email address is invalid. That then will raise error 20, which is the command was cancelled by the triggered script, as expected. But now we have that error, right? We can use it in our error checking script. So if get LastError will now take a different action if there was an error in the previous step, which there was. So in this case, instead of going on through to this step, which would corrupt the data by setting active to an invalid value, it will enter into the if block and just exit the script. Okay, so then we don't damage any data. And then we can go along. This time, we show active record when the email is valid. It can successfully get into find mode. This will enter true, and the process will go forward as expected. Can I? Oh, okay. This is probably a good. Let me see.
Resolution?
Yes.
I can do that when I'm on code, that kind of thing.
Or you can log in.
Does that fix it for the people online?
No, it does not.
Oh, really? They don't see the zoom?
Go to the view menu.
Yeah. I can zoom it a bit. This is kind of the end of this demo.
Oh,
So maybe on the next one we can zoom in a bit later. Cool. But yeah, that's okay. Hopefully on the recording it'll be a bit more pixel perfect. But this is essentially just to show you a kind of organic origin of how you might get into error checking. Now that's fine, and it obviously solves the problem, but the point I want to make is that it's a kind of reactive way to look at error checking, and it's partial. It just solves that error. It doesn't solve any other errors that might occur when you add stuff later. You haven't changed your approach to deal with errors, you've just kind of reacted to one error. So what I'm trying to outline today is going to be a way you can have a comprehensive approach that will handle these things kind of baked in. It's a benefit of the approach.
Another thing maybe might have been that you added validation to the active, what is it?
To the email?
No, to the active field, so that you
you could, yes.
You don't have only those two values.
Absolutely.
Right. So then that would have caused it to give you another error because the record was invalid.
Exactly.
And led you to troubleshoot that.
Exactly. Yeah. And always, as with everything in FileMaker, there's a load of ways you can address certain things. So you can be very defensive at the schema level. I feel that's less kind of done these days because people don't like editing their schemas, so they like to do validation at a higher level often, apart from like primary keys and things. And it can mess up things like imports. And obviously schema requirements change quite a lot, so people like to keep it a bit flexible often. But yeah, absolutely. There's all sorts of ways you can protect your data. But a simple system, you might not think that it would be. Often people think the only way to change data is via the user interface. So they'll say, well, my radio buttons are just active and inactive. What else could it be? But yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's be done with that and go back to our PowerPoint. So the goals I have for today. Sorry, I'm fighting a bit with this meeting to go away. All right, so the goals for today are to define the components of an error-aware scripting approach, and then to just show an implementation of an approach. So the reason I've split it like this is I think some people are going to be more interested just in the theory and just get some pointers about what they need to cover, and they'll go away and do their own implementation. My implementation is quite specific. It uses my kind of development style, and I don't want that to take away from the principles, which I think are kind of universal and useful for people to know. So there'll be some specific information here, but there won't be any implementation information in step 1. So let's kick off with that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is discovering errors. And when we say errors, I'm talking scripting errors, right? So errors when scripts are running. The second section here is going to be about how we represent errors in our system, how we store them, and portability is like how we transport them between scripts and maybe outside of scripts as well. And finally, we'll talk about error reaction. So that's, what do you do when an error happens? What can you do? And what are the tools? So this is really going to be looking at a little bit of theory, but really a lot of the tools that are available in FileMaker, because I'm not sure everyone knows the full scope of all of them. Okay, so let's start with error discovery. You'll probably be familiar with some or all of these functions. We've got getLastError, which we saw in the demo, getLastExternalErrorDetail, EvaluationError, which is maybe less well known. That's a great function. And then we have the native log files in FileMaker Pro and Go and Server. And then we have custom code, right? It's FileMaker, so you can do whatever you like to decide that there's an error. You can just write code. Okay, let's start with getLastError. I'm sure you'll mostly be familiar with this. It returns the FileMaker error code of the last script step. It's usually set after every script step, but not always. So I'm sure I don't know every exception, but the obvious exceptions are an if, like a control structure, will not reset last error. So if you have a find that doesn't return any records, getLastError will hold 401. If you then had an if control structure that you entered into, entering into the structure does not clear the last error. It stays available in getLastError. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not so good. So we're looking at ways as well later on where you can clear that last error in a kind of safe way if you want to get rid of it. But yeah, as a rule, it's set. Every single script will either throw an error number or it'll throw a 0 into that get function. Descriptions of the errors based on the codes can be found in the FileMaker help file for whichever version you're using. They add new codes every time a new version comes out, so it's important to keep up to date with those if you're using custom functions, for example, to find the description for an error code. Weirdly, not all errors that can be thrown are in the help file. So there's kind of a secret shadow list of other errors that you can get that is available mainly in custom functions. There's no exhaustive list, but this one's pretty good. You get about 99% of the errors in the help file. Okay, so the next step, getLastExternalErrorDetail. This one returns different values depending on the script step. So you can get information about ODBC errors. You can get SSL certificate errors. That's obviously much more important these days because FileMaker itself has more demand for SSL, but also lots of steps. ODBC imports, curl, you can verify SSL certificates, right? There's an option. So if there's an error with that, you'll get some details in there. And the other big one is curl, right? Curl in the last 2 versions has been vastly kind of improved in the insert from URL step. So now those curl error messages can be accessed from LastExternalErrorDetail. There's some other things you can get from that as well.
Alex,
yes?
Does that mean that you have to know where to put that specific step? Like no. If you know that you're using insert from URL, if you use that type of error catch.
So yeah, let me explain a bit more about this. This I call like a supplemental kind of step. So you would probably not use it to discover an error in the first place, but you're right. If you knew you were getting an error from certain steps, you probably want to grab it to help either diagnose the error or just add it as environmental error. Absolutely. So yeah, supplementary. It will rarely be useful to discover that an error has happened in the first place. You could use it for that, but it's not. You know, get LastError is usually.
So if you had insert from URL, you would still use get LastError.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll get a FileMaker error code from that step.
But if you wanted more detail, you would use this as well.
Yeah, you could call that, and it works in the same way, right? It gets cleared out periodically when another step runs. Okay. So, and the kind of hidden gem, I call it, evaluation error. So this is essentially for finding errors in calculations. It's not implemented in an extremely usable way, but we'll see how it can be made useful. So it allows, as I said, allows you to discover errors in the calculation engine, and it returns the FileMaker Pro error code for the expression in the expression parameter. And I'll show you an example.
When did that come?
It's been there for as long as I remember. Yeah, so at least 11 or 9 even, a long time. So this is great, and it's the same error code to get LastError, right? So it's got a matching list. A simple example would be an invalid date. So if you put date with all zeros, FileMaker can't hack it. So it will throw 500. Date value does not meet validation entry options. It just returns 500. I'm just telling you in the comments there that so it always returns a number, right? 0 or the error number.
Eric, it originated in version 7.
Well, oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought it originated when we got the ability to use a value. When did we get a value? Well, yeah.
That was pretty early as well, right?
Was that version 7 too?
Evaluate?
Yeah.
Please hold.
So far, you're batting 2.
That also came in 7.
Hey, there we go. So yeah, a bit of a sleeper function. Now, it's great just to be able to do that, but you can also see how it's not super useful in a script flow, because really what you want is you want to say, set my variable to this value unless there's an error. But this doesn't do that, right? You can't get, if you wrap something in evaluation error like this, no way to get what the value of that expression was. So there is a way to make it useful. This isn't a demo, this is just a slide of code. So imagine you're setting my variable. You can essentially do your important work right in this middle section where it says variable value calculation. So that's where you put your actual calculation that you want. You make that a local variable, which means its scope will extend out of this let function into the local scope. You wrap the whole thing in evaluation error, which is smart enough to evaluate the inner calculation. It doesn't just like evaluate this one. It will evaluate this calculation here. And then you can store that with the result of evaluation error in a local variable, and then just some cleanup at the end, which returns whatever the result of the local variable was to this my variable at the top. And then we clear that local variable, we copy it to a function scope, then we can clear it. And that's just to tidy up and save memory, right? We never want to keep a local variable longer than we have to when we're defining it in a function. That's not really what they're for, but it's very useful sometimes. So we'll come back to this. It's kind of integral to certain parts of the approach. I'll show later. And finally, for discovery, we have the 2 log files that hold data on script errors. One is new, one is not so new. So ScriptErrors is the new shiny from which handles local script errors for FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Go. Event.log is a kind of big hulking FileMaker server logging file. We're going to look at these right now in a little bit of detail. So the new one, ScriptErrors.log, that's what it looks like on the screen there. I've highlighted the stuff to the right because that's the only stuff that is super interesting. That's the step name, the line number, and the error number. In fact, the error number isn't that useful, but I highlighted it anyway. So it's available in FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Go. Nowhere else in the platform, so not server, not WebDirect, not Data API. It's stored in the user's documents folder. So it just appears there. You can't change that path. That's the only place it'll appear. And it's always called ScriptErrors.log. And as I kind of highlighted up there, it includes two key pieces of information we can't get with get functions. And those are the step name and the line number. Now, if you've done error checking in other languages, you'll know that the line number usually comes as standard, right? If you get a whole stack of JavaScript errors, it gives you each line. FileMaker has not been able to do that until we got these options. So yeah, that's why I put an exclamation point, because then you can do some serious error handling with that, if you know how to use it, which we'll look at later. And this log contains only script errors, so there's no other data you have to worry about, and also only script errors for you, right, a logged-in user, so there's no one else getting in the way. And you enable it using the set error logging script step, which is also new. Let's look at that in a little bit of detail. So the default for error logging is off. It can only be toggled if the user or script has full access privileges, which isn't ideal, but there it is. The setting persists until the file is closed. It may actually be until FileMaker is closed, but I think it's on a file level, so I would say probably until the file is closed. And it has one kind of parameter, which is a custom calculation, so it's any calculation using the calculation engine. And when an error occurs, that result will be written to the last space in the ScriptErrors.log file. So you can put anything in there. And it potentially is very powerful, but we'll see maybe why it's not as powerful as it could be later on. But I just wanted, it's definitely available, and you can do a lot with it using the new file script steps that also came in 18. Yeah, and just to highlight again, only available in Pro and Go, so you cannot base your entire strategy around this file if you're going to use it on WebDirect, on server scripts. So yeah, bear that in mind. So more quickly, I'll go over Event.log because this is more well-known and slightly less relevant, but still relevant here. So Event.log's a big kind of server-level event log. It logs stuff from multiple files. It logs PSOS sessions and FileMaker server scheduled scripts, but a load of other stuff. You can get step name and line number also from this. I've highlighted it there, so that's good. But you can't get access to it directly from a script session. You can use a plugin, such as Base Elements, or any plugin that has shell scripting or file system interaction, or you could use a shell script to copy it to the temp folder, and then you can parse it there, if you wish. And as I said, it contains data from multiple users. It contains like connection information, tells you when the server started. It's a kind of mishmash of stuff, and it can be huge. It can be up to 40 megs, and then it starts again. So it's serious work dealing with that file in real time. Okay, so now I just wanted to stick in my health warning for the native error log. So I touched on this already, but these are the problems with it. So firstly, because it's in the user documents directory, they can mess with it, right? You definitely don't want to put confidential information in there because, you know, that file is out in the open. So if you're putting like, you know, an invoice went wrong and the number was this and the client was this, that's bad news because then that's unsecured on the user's computer. It's not supported platform-wide, so you can't rely on it to be there, right? Your LastError get function always going to be there for you. Nothing can go wrong. But if this isn't here, then your error tracking, if it's based entirely on this file existing, will just stop working, and that's bad. It only provides partial information. Now, you can use that custom error area, that custom calculation area to add in that information, but then you can end up with a kind of unwieldy slice of information because the error log is line-based, right? So it's lines and then tabs, which is much harder to parse and say a whole. If it was all a JSON object, it's kind of easier to work with. So you're kind of hamstringing yourselves a little bit by trying to just rely on that. You can't get environment information directly in there. So therefore, my argument is you should really only augment your error handling with this error log file. It doesn't really replace custom. Okay. So finally, in error discovery, we have custom code. And this is basically just reminding you that you can just write code to decide when there's an error. So a good example of this would be if you're checking for an empty script parameter that was passed to a script. And this gets into implementation a little bit, but essentially you can say there is an error if my record ID variable is empty, right? And I'm going to say that error is -2. So if all the other situations aren't working for you, you can just explicitly say, in this case, there is this error. Obviously, again, it's a strength of FileMaker that you can, the calculation engine just gives you a lot of power to do whatever you need to do in a pinch. Okay, so that is error discovery. Next, we're on to representation, storage, and portability. So representation, essentially, well, with all three of these, the main thing is just to be consistent and thorough, right? There's no point in, you can't really have two different approaches within one system. It's a nightmare to deal with. So if you can be consistent within your script and how you represent, store, and move errors around, then you've kind of won half the battle. You know, even if you're just passing the code between scripts, that's all of it, and at least you can rely on how it's going to work. That's more important than sometimes passing the code, sometimes passing an object, right? That would be much harder to deal with. So error representation really just means define what an error is in your solution. On the basic level, it's a code, right? It could be the number of the error code. That usually isn't enough, so you may want to add extra information. But it's completely up to you what is the minimum amount of information and what is the full amount you want. So for example, you might be just like, all I need is the error code and the script name, and that represents an error to me, and I can use my discovery tools to look at it. I'd strongly recommend you take influence from other error representations in the FileMaker platform. There are a few. Or other platforms, because other platforms generally have more mature error logging than FileMaker, so you can get some good tips from them. So I'm talking like JavaScript, C++, all those kind of languages that have been dealing with this stuff much longer, have big communities to draw on. I would advise that JSON makes a lot of sense, as long as you're in 16+, because you can process it easily within FileMaker, and it can also be passed out by other platforms as well. Almost every language now has a JSON processing tool. Okay, so once you've decided in your representation, you just need to decide how to store errors. So we saw this a bit earlier where I had this error code variable. That's like a little bit of related metadata to help drive the error storage. And again, consistency is really what you need here. If you're going to store errors in a JSON object, make sure the structure is always exactly the same. And if you're storing errors in local or global variables, again, use consistent names, but more importantly, make sure they don't clash with solution variables. So often, the best way is to either namespace or prefix your error variables. That way, if someone like builds a system that deals with errors and they're passing errors all the time, it's not clashing with your variable that you've just named error. So the example that you saw in mine, you can use a tilde, or you can use an underscore, or if you're really eager, you can use a like error checking. You know, you can namespace if you want. Okay, and portability is just about transporting errors around between scripts. Usually, You can deal with every error as it comes up, but very often you'll want to tell the user about it, you'll want to log it, or you want to pass it back to its calling script. Okay, so you can do something with that error. So when you're doing that, you basically have to bear in mind that you're not just going to be passing errors in a lot of cases. If your script is like a sum script that adds two numbers, the user is going to need to be able to access both the result of that, so the addition of the two numbers, but also the error. So you have to have that dual purpose in mind. So we need to distinguish between the error representation and the expected response. JSON is great for this because it can store really complex but separate data structures. So you can have a very high level split that's really simple and then have as much complexity as you like underneath some pretty basic headers. This is probably easier to understand when you see the implementation later. What I would say at this point is custom functions are really essential for this. What you don't want to build is a system where just getting the result from a script is a hassle for users, right? You really want to say to them, you know, in this case, you can't just use get script result, but you can use a custom function which will get the script result into your variable. So you really just want a really concise syntax for them to get the result of a script, and ideally handle the errors that came in one movement. And again, we'll see that in the implementation. Okay, so the last section here is about error reaction, and this is a bit more practical as well. So FileMaker has its own default error reactions. You've probably seen them quite a lot when you've messed up your system and deleted a script, for example. If you don't have any of your own management, you'll just see things like this, FileMaker Pro custom dialog. And if you're doing an error scripting approach, you need to decide when you're going to suppress these reactions and when you're going to use them. And you use set error capture to decide how to do that. So that's the tool for managing FileMaker's default reactions, such as those dialogues. It's off by default, so default reactions will just happen. If you set it to on, it remains on throughout the script stack unless it's turned on. In a script stack, I mean you run one script at the start from, say, a button, and then every subscript called from that or any triggered script will maintain the set error capture state that you set unless you change it in that script. So it's really a stack level scope. So, and the other thing I wanted to mention there is surprisingly that state is passed to perform script on server. So if you perform a server script and error capture is on, when you get to the server, error capture will be on. So it's not like other situations where you have we have to rebuild your context from scratch. That little bit of context does get passed to the server. And if you ever need to know what the error capture state is, you can use the get error capture state function. 1 is on, 0 is off. So usually you will want to just put error capture on most of the time if you're doing it yourself, right? Some examples of where the default reaction of FileMaker is useful. The first one is find records. So we're probably used to seeing this dialog, right, for error 401. But this dialog has a magic function that you can't get with scripts. That is, if you press cancel, you can go back to your original found set as if the find action never happened. If you're trying to script this, you won't be able to do it. If you have a cancel button, which just exits your script, it's going to give you a blank found set, which most of the time is not what you want. It's not easy to recreate that found set. Now, a lot of the time, our systems might not let users do finds themselves, so this isn't a problem. But if users are using find in the kind of traditional way, then this dialog can be useful, so they get a better experience when they get the result. The other one that's useful as a default reaction, which again is pretty common, is the record locked dialog for error 301, record in use by another user. You get a lot of good info here. You get the name and account that's using the record, and you can send them a message. Now, there is absolutely no way to get that message sending native. You can't script that at all. So if you need this functionality where you can say, hey, get out of my record, you're going to have to use the default reaction. Note that if you do just need the username or the account name, you can actually get that from LastExternalErrorDetail. So that's an example of how that supplementary info can be really useful. So if you're doing a set field and you get error 301, you can be like, okay, let me get some more info and log who was using the record at the time. Yeah, so that's a good example of both a useful default reaction and get LastExternalErrorDetail. Okay. And then finally, you can come up with your own error reactions, because most of the time you'll turn off the default ones. And basically, these can be in the form of code, as in stuff you do in a script once you know there's an error, or it can be a visual representation.
I thought that was part of your presentation.
Yeah, you can make a note. You could play a sound file.
Like a lightsaber.
Yeah, very nice. So I shall change that to visuals or audio. But yeah, so you're going to want something. We'll see some examples in a minute. But the kind of things you might want to do, you might want to silently log an error. You might want to try and fix it, which can always make things worse, but you might want to try and take retroactive steps. You might want to log the error and inform the user that it occurred, right? You might want to say, record is locked, log that fact, and then say to the user, show them somehow that it was locked and you can continue. Sometimes you want to ignore it. FileMaker throws a bunch of errors that are kind of, you don't care about. So if you're listening for errors, you'll have to also learn to realize when the error is not a big deal. Think of like getting to the end of a found set, getting error 1. Often you won't care about that error, so you don't want it to stop your script. Okay, so that is the end of the kind of define period. I want to pause for a sec. If anyone a chance to ask any questions. Next bit's going to be a quick demo and then a dive into a implementation of it. And if anyone asks a question in the chat, I guess Vince will have to tell me.
Tony White's here.
So Tony's got a question. Tony White. Log and send a notification to the dev. So meaning that the system gets an error, you log it, and then you get, as a developer, you get notified.
Absolutely.
Yes. That error occurred.
Yes, that's a great pattern. Often in sensitive systems that you know have kind of that should not have errors, certainly of a certain type, you could absolutely instantly send an email. Certainly with insert from URL now, you can do that without too much infrastructure, right? You can just, an insert from URL call will get you where you need to go pretty quick. So yeah, that's a great example of a reaction.
Is asking to have everyone get muted.
Oh, can I? Yeah.
See what we can do about that.
And then another question or a comment from Tony. Slack notification and fast fix.
Yeah, no, I love this because
Unmute. So if anybody wants to be unmuted, they can.
Yeah.
The errors.
If you get an error.
Well, we do it in Inspector, right?
Yeah.
You can do that. Yeah, you can get super creative, and I've never found a situation where like getting notified about an error has really led to anything bad happening. So it's definitely good to.
So the different methods that you can get notified.
Yeah, absolutely.
Send an email, send Slack notification.
Yeah,
Another
text
comment by
message.
Robert. Anyone annoyed that some dialogues are still showing even when error catcher is on?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Like which one?
Oh, there's a bunch.
Oh, yeah?
There's the file. Can you suppress the missing file? I don't think you can. So sometimes you'll get a dialog to open a missing file, even with error capture on. We should have a list. But, yeah. Then FileMaker can work through them one by one, getting rid of them.
I think at some point it surfaced where there was a request made to have a level of the error. So, like, for example, if I have a script that says go to next record, go to next record, exit after last. When you're on the last record, you get an error because you're going to go to the next record, but you're exiting after last. So technically, you made the statement say that you know that you're going to exit after last, but it still throws an error.
Yeah.
So in the Event.log, you'll get all those errors saying, like if you use that pattern, you're always going to get an error for that. So one way to avoid it is, get record number equals get found count, and you exit like that rather than, and you put it in the right place, etc.
Yeah.
But the idea was surfaced that it would be interesting to have a level of error to log, so that, or to show. So that way, those ones, you can still report them as errors if I'm looking at all errors, but maybe I'm only interested in the critical ones,
Like the PHP system where they have like a warn level and then they have a higher level.
Critical.
Yeah, critical or something, yes. Yeah, that sort of thing. We actually get to the wish list at the end, so we can talk more about that. Any other cues at the moment?
Another comment by Robert, go to related record, for the found set gives an error when the current record has no related record.
Absolutely, yes. That's a good one. So those are the things that's where you're looking to ignore certain errors, right? So you need to, in your code, unfortunately, be smart and say, I'm expecting this error, don't stop the show because of it. And we'll see a little bit about how we can do that.
But that one's kind of like a little tricky too, because you can have 10 records, and the first record has no related records, but the second or third or later records have related records. So when you say that from the context of the first record, you want to go to related records for the found set, it will go there, but it will still give you an error.
So you got to check you're in the right, you got to check you're in the right context, right? Have you gone to those related? No, but to check whether that's a false flag, you need to see where you are after that error happened.
Right.
If you've got a found set of records in the table you're expecting, you're good. If you're still where you were because no window open, then So you have to, at the moment, you have to manually do that. Yeah. And that's a weakness for sure. Cool. So let's do a demo.
That's where maybe the level might be interesting, right? Because that could be a warning.
Why not just make it so you just pick and choose which ones you want?
Well, that's what you could do, right? You just have level, and you can paste in all the... Yeah. It should be configurable, for sure. For sure. White chocolate error. Okay, so let's... I get my other languages bit in now. This will be fun. And then I'm going to basically do a demo of my approach. Okay, so other languages and error handling. Sometimes people will say FileMaker, unlike FileMaker, a certain language has error handling built in. And this is kind of... Now, this isn't really correct, although I know where people are coming from, right? So it is true, it's not true that FileMaker doesn't have error handling built in, right? We've seen a bunch of it. You get those dialogues, you get error codes thrown. It does have something. It's just not that great to use as is. It's not very powerful. It misses things. It doesn't really stop errors happening in your system. But other languages, yes, they have error handling built in, but also no serious application built in those languages is going to only use it as is, right, and not write any error handling code. You may get a slightly different level, as in JavaScript, like will stop execution on its own in a way FileMaker might not, but you'd still be mad to use that in a production environment as your only error handling. So the point is that no matter what language we're using or platform, in the case of FileMaker, to have good error handling, you have to do some manual work. So I want to try and get away from this idea that you just don't do that work in FileMaker. It's worth doing that work the same way it's worth doing in JavaScript, C++, or anything else. Okay, so we can learn from other languages because you know, a lot of other languages have been around forever. They have a huge user base, and they're open source, so they get, you know, they just have a higher volume of people thinking about this stuff. And what I wanted to highlight here, because it'll come up in the implementation, is that we can handle errors in JavaScript, say, using this idea of try, catch, finally. So a try block will stop when an error occurs. So a.thing will run if there's an error. A.thing2 will not run. If there's no error in the first statement, then the second statement will run, and so on. The catch block will only run if there was an error in the previous two, in the try block, and the finally block will always run at the end anyway. It doesn't matter if there was an error or not. Okay, so, and most other languages have the same principle of try catch. The flavor is varies, but it's the same sort of thing. So we can't actually match this easily in FileMaker. It's just not quite built that way. But I have found it's a useful organizing principle for an error scripting approach, which we'll see soon. Okay, so the error approach that I have built is called DIET. That's an acronym, kind of came about by accident. And essentially it refers to the section. Each script has four distinct sections. There's a description section, initialization, execution, termination. Those are the four sections. Spells DIET. Okay, so now before there's too much more detail, I just want to give a demo of the final thing across all the platforms. So those are the demos we're going to do. I'm going to try and burn through them all pretty quick. They're all very basic. But they do rely on a hosted file. A bit of excitement to proceeding, seeing if it's going to connect. Just as an aside, this file is hosted on a AWS Nano instance using Windows Server, and it costs $12 to run it a month, which I think is pretty good. And it's crazy that you can run Windows Server and FileMaker Server on like 700 megs of RAM. I don't know how they do it. All right, so let's burn through these. So what I'm showing you here is the same essential error handling across as many platforms as I have time to do. So this is FileMaker Pro running a script that's designed to throw a bunch of errors, and it's running this script locally in the client. Okay, so this here is our error presentation, error reaction. It's to show this dialog. Let me zoom in, right, so. No. Click OK. I don't think it'll work. Let's see.
Go to view.
Like that, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll work on the card. Let's see. Maybe it will.
Yeah, maybe not.
Let's try. Oh, yeah, better than nothing. Great. Okay, so you run a script, and we get the errors back. You can see this is pretty rich, right, what you can get. You can get the line number. You can get the step name. This is the parsed out error code. So it tells you what the error is, tells you the code, and then there's this detail parameter I've decided to add. You can see what I was trying to do. I was trying to set a date variable to a ridiculous date that FileMaker can't understand. Now, this information is easy to get. It's hard to present. It took me a long time to figure out how to present this data in a way that might be useful. So that's half the battle. First half is getting the data. Second half is presenting it in a way that the user finds easy to understand or another developer finds easy to understand. This These errors are split by script, so you'll see we ran 2 scripts, and we got errors in both of them. And we logged all those errors. So in subscript, we got some other errors. We got an execute SQL error, and we got a script is missing error.
So my script is a name script?
So yeah, so this is what isn't super clear, because it doesn't say script name. But yeah, each heading here is a script name. So my script, and then within that there was a subscript. So that is it on the client. If we run it on the server, it takes a little longer, we can get the same info. I have to say with a lot of work, but you can get it. And again, we get the line numbers, we get all this stuff. It's exactly the same in this case. Okay, where are we next? We were going on to WebDirect. Okay. WebDirect in our friend Safari. Okay, so again, it's amazing. On this tiny server, I can run Data API and WebDirect. That's the full web publishing engine. It's kind of nuts. Okay, so I'm not sure if Zoom is going to work, but you might. So this is very different anyway, right? So it's exactly the same layout in this case. We're getting the same info, but WebDirect doesn't support card windows yet. So it's in a custom dialog. The layout I'm not super happy with. It's not so clear, the split between scripts, but all the info is there apart from the line numbers and the step names. Because this is running just in WebDirect, there's a local script. There's no script error log, so you can't get the line numbers. You can get everything else, right? So this shows why you should use the script log, the script errors log, just to supplement, right? You have to code for a situation where that log isn't available. So that's what that's here. And you can do it on the server. You get this nice thing, and then you can get the lines back. Now, if you've ever done any WebDirect for serious heavy lifting, you'll know that often it's best to run proper transactions. You'll run them on the server in most cases anyway, so you can get the full details pretty often. Okay. Okay, while we're there in the browser, I wrote a very quick website based off the Data API. This is doing the same thing. I'm going to zoom this in because that probably worked well. So we have run my script on server. Now, here's a good time to mention that since FileMaker 18, you can run scripts using the Data API without any attendant process. In 17, you had to hook it onto a find request or a create record request, which was a pain. Now you can just purely run a script. It's great, and you'll get the result. So if we run my script, exactly the same script. Come on. Amazon's let me down. I was so nice about it. All right, actually, this has been idle for a while, so let me refresh. Okay, let's try again. There we go. So this is just a simple asynchronous request to the FileMaker Data API. It runs that script just using the Data API execute script call, and you'll see again, same info as with WebDirect, no line numbers, but nice spacing there and a cool list for the results. We can run it on server. It'll take a little longer, but we can get the full info if it's run on server. So that's just using the Data API, right? And the execute script. And the final couple of demos. Let's see if this works. I probably have to unlock it first. Oh, no, there it is. Okay. So this feature came out in version 10.10, and it never really got much better from the first version. Always a little bit flaky. What if I start recording it? Does that help? No. Did it put it somewhere else? No. Oh, right there. Give it one more chance.
Oh, maybe because it's conflicting with go to meeting. Is it? No. No. It should be.
Probably not.
There it is.
It's just not. Doesn't like it. It's a shame. You're just going to have to take my word for it that it works really well on FileMaker Go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to give it one final go. Then I promise I'll give up. Yeah. Oh well. Not working, but it does work. I actually like that didn't work because sometimes FileMaker Go messes up the first time you do it. So. Cool. But anyway, the point is made. It's kind of a system-wide approach.
So go back 1 second to the data API.
Oh, okay.
So you're calling the second one. You're calling the data API to run a script and then run it on server.
Yeah. So it's calling a local script that within it has a perform script on server call. Yeah. There's no way to say to the data API, run this script on server. You have to internalize it. So I want to go through the details of this approach. I feel like I've talked for about an hour. I've got a little bit more. Is that okay if I run on a little? Oh, cool. Great.
You're on a diet and we're all eating candy.
Yeah, I mean, a diet doesn't have to be a healthy diet, right? It can be an unhealthy diet. Cool. So let's look at the script structure. I really don't know if I can zoom this in, but hopefully it's clear enough. So this is the kind of underlying structure to every script or every significant script. So we have our description where you do the basic commenting of what the script does. We have our initialization section where that will handle the error capture state, which is kind of one of the most important parts of this approach. And also it'll configure the native error logging. Now that's done in a subscript because as we saw earlier, you have to have full access to configure the native error logging. So that runs in a script that has full access. It's the only way to manipulate it when users are using it. We have the execution section, which is tiny in this error, but that's where in this example, just so I could fit it on, but this is where the action of the script happens, right? All your business actions you do in this section. And finally, this is just a truncated version. You have the terminations section where it's kind of where the cleanup happens, usually where the error handling happens as well. And a few like final steps. We clear the last error here as well. I think I've got another screenshot. Yeah, okay. So I wanted to go into termination in a bit more detail because it includes one of the key aspects of this approach, which is the single point of exit. Now, other scripting approaches use this as well, so that certainly at Beeswax we're familiar with the single pass loop. That is smart because rather than exiting the script when something bad happens, it just exits the loop, and you can still exit the script in one place. The important thing about that for error handling and scripts that return results is you need to know that that result is going to be set to something useful at the time you exit. Otherwise, it can mess up your whole kind of chain of script handling, error handling, and result handling. So yeah, it's important for this approach to have just one point of exit, and we'll show how we achieve that without using the single pass loop in a moment. Okay.
You guys have a template script that you guys just...
Me guys, at the moment.
Oh, I don't know, that was a whole Beeswax thing.
Yeah, but I mean, this is his thing that he's showing like from when you were doing this, right?
Yeah, this is mainly work I did while I was waiting for some Beeswax projects. still in my old job. I had a bit of free time. But yeah, as I say, it comes from like these 5 years of doing it. It's kind of a culmination. But I'd love if Beeswax took this approach up for some systems. Anyway, so yeah, just to comment this a bit, the point of the single point of exit is it could separate primary code and error response code. If you have that single point of exit, you know, it just makes it easier to parse a script, right? You know you need to read through to the end. You know that there's no sneaky stuff happening, like you're going to exit the script early. MA, of course, there's always exceptions, like special scripts that need to exit at certain points, but this is the rule, right? If you're doing a regular script, you're going to want a single point of exit to make your life easier. And importantly, you can set your response variables, that's the real result you want. You can set that in the same place, one place in each script, rather than having to say, okay, I'm going to exit early, so I've got to make sure my response is set. You can just do it all in the same place at the end. Okay, so there's a bunch of
comments from Douglas.
Oh, yeah.
Error handling fail on the spelling of the...
Oh, termination? I know, right? Termination. See, the thing is, I noticed that when I ran through.
Yeah.
I fixed it, but I couldn't fix the screenshot without redoing all those stupid red things. I was like, let's see who's paying attention, and you guys are. So, yeah.
But, you know, I mean, you have the termination as being like a single pass part, or is the whole script part of a single pass?
No, so there's no loop. It's an entire single pass, yeah, and you'll see how that works in a bit more detail. In fact, in this bit, so this is the kind of crux of how the script structure works. So the error discovery in this implementation relies on 3 types of script blocks, I call them, that combine an if control structure with a custom function. And this will go back to when we talked about try, catch, finally. We have try, catch, and always. So we'll see this in a bit more detail now. So this is our try. The reason it's underscore died is just because I have so many custom functions I need to namespace them. There's hundreds, well, it's not hundreds, but there's a lot. So this returns true if there is not an error, right? So that's your kind of signal. You put it before any block of code, after a block that might have thrown an error, and then you know if there's no errors, it's safe to go in. We have diet catch, which will return true if there is an error. So that's when you want to, in the termination section, say, okay, if there are some errors, I need to deal with them now. If there were no errors, you just skip over that error handling block. And we can maybe look at this actually outside of Keynote in a second. Then we have the last one, which is diet always. And this is similar to finally, right? Sometimes you just want to always do something, even if the script didn't get anywhere. So sometimes if it's a script that goes to a bunch of layouts, you might want to not figure out if you've ended up on the right layout, but just always go back to the original layout at the end, or always go back to a certain layout at the end, something like that. So yeah, that's just how you still do your error tracking, but you also make sure that you can make something happen all the time. But it's still guarded by this block, right? There's no, that doesn't happen at the outer level. So as well as controlling whether a block runs, these functions handle all the storage of the error objects and the parsing of any script results that come in. For the current script only. So let me have a quick demo of this. I'm worried that it won't look large enough, but let's see, because you can't zoom these in. So let me zoom in, at least on the screen. I don't think I can. You can't zoom this in. No. Okay. So I've decided to kind of demo something I call get file, because it's quite fully featured. So we have the description section at the top, which essentially just lists a few things about the script and the parameters. There's nothing special about how I describe the parameters. You know, I just came to this by convention. It's important to list what it returns, though. If it returns anything special, often it'll just return. You can just say it returns a result object, so you know you're getting an object. So initialization in these scripts is where you handle the parameters as well as doing the stuff we saw before. So there's the assignment of the parameters to the variables. Right at the beginning there, we're setting the script parameter we're setting it to a variable. So we know that it's safe JSON, so then we don't have to check each one of these for an error. We then do our required variable check. So you'll see here the file path is required. If it's empty, then I'm going to throw my own error. So this is an example of a custom error detection. Then we set some defaults if they haven't been passed. These are optional, so start position. I just want to be clear, this is using the new FileMaker file reading functions to read data from a file. That's the point of this script, in case it's not clear. So start position, that's an option in the FileMaker files, chunk size, read format. So that kind of just pulls those in. Okay, so now the execution. So you'll see this diet block, this try block is preventing this code from happening if an error has shown up anywhere previously. So if this throws an error, none of these blocks are going to run. If this throws an error, none of these steps are going to run in this block. So you will not get into this execution area, you won't get into the step 53 unless everything happened successfully before. So you know, and this is really powerful, if you're doing something like creating a new record or something that can fail, entering find mode like we saw before, you want to be sure you're there before you set the fields or before you start using a context. So in this case, we're not doing that kind of stuff, but we're still doing stuff where you definitely know you don't want to continue if that stuff goes wrong. So if you can't get the file size of your file from your file path, you definitely don't want to continue, right? That's a basic operation that you're going to need to do the rest of the script. So that's just in its own block. Again, if you can't open the file, get out of there. You don't want to do anything else. All of these are kind of script critical things that can go wrong. When you're dealing with the external file system, all sorts can go wrong there, right? So you want to be very sure. Then we see a more complex structure, which is still wrapped in this try block, but it's a looping structure. I wanted to show this because you do have to get creative and you have to kind of think on your feet about how you're going to handle various kind of standard FileMaker things like loops, but still make your script error compliant. So here we'll see, for example, this exit loop step. We're looking out for an error. So we're going to exit if there's an error, and then our regular sort of reasons that we'd exit. We then have this inner try block as well to make absolutely sure that we haven't, that we're not doing this unless you have an error. Then again, we have more kind of just standard FileMaker stuff based on the user's preference set through the parameters. And then we have an example of when you might want to ignore an error here on line 80. So you see what we're doing. I don't know if you've used read from data file much, but when it gets to the end of the data file, it throws error 10, okay? And it's always going to get to the end of the data file in the end. So that error is always going to happen. Very similar to the loop, right? You're always going to get to the end of your found step. So rather than just saying, whatever the last error is, I want to stop my script because of it, we capture the last error in a variable here. Should have namespaced it, didn't. And then we interrogate it and say, if the last error wasn't 10, then yes, we care about that error. Otherwise, we don't care. So we clear out the last error code. We set our error detection variable to blank so we can continue. And then we just go through and actually use last error to decide if we've reached the end of the file, right? It then becomes a useful bit of information instead of an error showing that something's gone wrong. If we've reached the end of the file, we know up here we're going to exit the loop. And then otherwise, we're going to read in this data into the into our result variable, which is file content. And now in this pattern, I wanted to catch the error that occurred in the loop right away, and at the same time exit the loop if there was an error. So this is a useful kind of catch-all loop exit at the end. But again, it's quite creative, right? You have to really think through these structures in order to make everything consistent. And then at the end, this is just us putting the result, the file content variable together and setting it into the response. So file content ends up in our result variable, and our result variable, the way we've done it, is it always sets up whatever the result is, it's in a property called response. It's not named, so it's always response. So even though the file variable here is called file content, it still gets set just in a property called response. And then, I like this as well because we have an always block. We want to say no matter what happened, what errors we got, if the file is open, as in if we have a file ID, we want to close that file to make sure that it's available for future use or for use by the file system. So that's always going to happen if there's a file ID. Okay, and then at the end, we go through, let's see if I can get that, maybe. Might be a bit tricky to zoom in on that. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, and then at the end, this is where we handle our errors. So diet catch will return true if there was an error. And then this is where you can do the work of parsing the native error log if you want to. So I've kind of guarded this by a custom function that decides whether or not it wants to go and do this extra work. And that's just because it's a lot of extra work, right? Sometimes it'll just be too much and you won't want to do it, so you'll set the custom function not to do it or set it to look at a setting somewhere. Otherwise, you'll get it and you'll supplement data from there into your error you've already found. And finally, we run this process errors script, which will handle whether or not you want to log the error or display the error. We'll see a bit more of that later on. And then we have this final cleanup steps. This resets the error handling if it needs to. And this clear last error just makes sure that none of the errors from one script get passed to another, like none of the results of get last error hang around, because that can mess up the script, the error discovery. And right at the end, always, we just return this result. So that result, which we'll look at in the presentation now, looks like this. So we have...
Oh. Sure.
We're badged.
Oh, you are?
Doesn't matter, yeah.
Oh, then you're fine.
Cool. All right.
Great. So, cheers, guys. Cool. So the error representation is a JSON object, like I was heavily hinting. You can add extra stuff, but my stuff is the message, the code, the script name, and some detail, and then other data you can add.
You guys want a little light in here, or are we good taking a nap?
It's a little dark.
A little light would be nice.
Yeah.
Which one?
Take your pick.
Oh, that's good. Nice. Perfect. Very cozy. Great. And so, yeah, that's the representation of an error. So when you're talking about an error in this this approach, it means this, essentially an object in JSON with these properties. And they're stored as part of this larger result variable, which we'll see in a second. And we store some temporary data, like you saw error code featured a lot. So that's kind of metadata about errors. The reason it's quite complex is because we're supporting multiple errors, okay? So we can store as many errors as we need. You don't have to do that. It's much simpler to just store one error and then stop catching errors after you've found one. But I wanted to go a little bit further just to show that I could. And it is actually useful to get all the errors if you've got always actions that you want to track. And so to enable storing multiple errors, they're actually stored in an array, which is modeled on the FileMaker data API result structure. So it's in fact identical pretty much. So you'll see here that there's the messages. They're an array of the message object we saw before. And then the response is actually the result of the script. This will always be the case if you're running a script with the result. The result will always be in this response area. And in the custom functions, you can set that response to any type of value, like a string, null if you want, Boolean, number, object, array, anything. So it's pretty flexible, and it'll all be pure JSON at that point. So you can parse it if it's going through the data API to an external site, or you can parse it in FileMaker. Okay. So this stuff I'm going to zoom through a bit more quickly. I can make it available if you're interested in these points, but essentially I do all the error tracking, all the error processing within each script. So the errors are captured and processed in place and then passed between scripts. That essentially means that we don't have to worry about errors in subscripts. We don't need to interrogate them in the parent scripts. We just need to get them from the result. So it just makes it easier to handle the stack. And yeah, you saw that clearing of the LastError variable at the end of the script. The reactions you saw in the demos, I turn off default reactions from FileMaker as a rule. The available reactions in my process errors script are display, log, and halt. Halt is a kind of a very bad idea in most situations. It's not great for security, and it's very blunt. It'll just stop all scripts, leave you exactly where you were. I added it as an option, but I wouldn't recommend using it. But you can pass a halt Boolean, and it'll halt. But display and log are much more interesting and useful. Now you can decide at any point to display or log a variable using the parameters of the process error script. But I kind of have a default where the error capture state is used to decide when to display and log errors. And that's important because it ensures that those actions only happen at the end of a script session. If you were logging errors in every script, you get duplicates, right? Or you display an error in the script where the error happened, then in the parent script it would show the error again, and then in the parent script of that script it would show it again. So set error capture is always off at the beginning of a script session, and you can test for that, which I do. So then you can, when you get to each script, you can say, right, was error capture off at the beginning of this script? If so, then I'm at the top of the stack. So then I'm going to display my error message to the user, and I'm going to log that error. The logging in this system is just to a global variable at the moment. There's no table, but obviously it's easy to build a table. Okay, so that's it for the implementation. I just want to say in conclusion that you can do robust error handling in FileMaker right now. From my experience, this sort of scripting, it'll benefit projects of any size, not just like verticals or kind of ERP level systems. It essentially, once you've agreed the approach, you put that work in, and you've communicated it among your team, you'll be able to develop more quickly and you can script more confidently. Once you're confident in your error approach, you've tested it, you can then do things, you can lose a lot of the typical things you have to worry about when scripting, because you know the typical problems like records being locked, transactional issues can be handled by your structure. So once you learn to trust in it, you'll find that you can spend more time doing the fun stuff like integration, reporting, and business logic stuff that what earns your money, rather than having to worry too much about possible issues with certain steps, because that's going to handle in your approach. Cool. So very quickly, I'm just going to zoom through those. There are two approaches that I think this works particularly well with. One is automated testing. So it's pretty self-explanatory, but if you are querying all the scripts in your solution with a automated testing file, it's really useful if your scripts return consistent results. So consistent responses and consistent errors. Your testing will just go way quicker because you're not fighting against the scripts themselves in order to test them. And also, as I mentioned before, transactional scripting is really good with this approach. Usually the challenge with a transaction is to figure out if there's an error and what type of error you want to stop the transaction on. If you're doing this kind of error-aware scripting, you kind of get that built in, right? You can say, okay, there's an error, just ditch the whole transaction, and you can tell the user about it because you have your reactions built in, and you can log it. So, yeah, it really works well if people are doing kind of complex transactions with, potentially touching 10 or more records. All those kind of updates where you update something in one place and then you have to send those updates out to all the entities that relate to it. You can do that in a totally safe way. You can say, if I can't get a lock on every record, the user's not going to be able to make this name change, for example. Or you can say, if I can't get a lock on this record, I'm going to wait and try again in a few seconds, that sort of thing. It's just really easy as that. Okay. Any questions on that before we do the wish list? I know there's a lot.
Did you like do research like anybody else's approach to error handling before this and found them wanting, I guess, or? Yeah,
unfortunately there just weren't a lot of, so there was the great stuff on FileMaker standards. That was really the best I found. It's very hard in general to get someone to show you a full system that's error handled anyway. So I really had to kind of intuit a lot by like reading forum posts and seeing what people were doing. Like with transactional scripting, right? There's quite a lot about that. So a lot of the error handling comes from reading about transactional scripting. So yeah, there was nothing directly that I found that was comprehensive, right? You always see, here's how you can handle an error, right? It's mentioned in the exam sometimes. But for me, that wasn't comprehensive enough. So yeah, I had to do a lot of the work myself, unfortunately. Even like the Carbon framework that came out from Geist, I was quite excited about that. But it's not really error focused. It does do some error handling, but it wasn't quite what I expected. And it does so much other stuff, I couldn't really distill the error handling in that down in a way I liked. So yeah, I had to do most of it myself based on the very good kind of theoretical work out there, but I couldn't really look at a lot of other approaches. And I'm hoping that other people have a little more, getting this out there might, help build more of a sharing kind of community around this.
Does it come with some comments from Robert? Something about if you want to look at it.
Oh, can I do that?
Yeah, you can exit out. I think you'll see.
Oh yeah, I see the chat thing. Yeah. There it is. Awesome.
Right, looks like the last 3 comments.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
The first one from Robert about something where.
I see. So Robert says, in the loop, you had an exit loop if on both diet catch and at the top. Won't the bottom one prevent the top one from ever happening? Good question. So yeah, that was a slightly odd structure. It wouldn't stop the top one from ever happening because the bottom one only responds when there's an error. The top one responds when there's an error, but also when the loop has just reached its natural end. Now, I think it's possible that I don't need the error code check in the first loop, and that could be redundant because I think I put the last exit loop step in later. So it could be that that's redundant. I would have to test that, but yeah, that's a great catch.
And then
can we look?
You wanted to see your custom function.
Or diet catch. Okay, yes, sorry. I did mean to show that.
And then something else from Tony afterwards.
Great, the stack. Yes, I'm glad someone's mentioned the stack because, yeah, I wanted to include something about that. So I'll definitely check that out. Because, yeah, I could imagine how you could build your own stack, but I just didn't have time. So thanks, Tony. I definitely want to look at that. Okay, so let's quickly dip into this custom function. Now, custom functions are just hard to parse, right, with your eyes. So they don't have the nice calculation engine of the other. Maybe I'll copy it into the calculation engine. That might be nice. So first thing I want to highlight is all these steps are all these functions are basic. They all just reference diet check for error. That's the main driver. And this one, check for error returns true if there's no error. So for the try, we just return true if there's no error, and then great, you can go and try. Catch is the same, looks at the same same custom function, but returns false. So like that will only run if there's an error. So it's just the same thing, but it puts a not in front of it. And always will also run that custom function because we need to check for the error, but it'll just always return true in either case. So that's how we get the thing to always run. So I think this does make sense to just copy this.
Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it's just sugar, right? So a lot of them just call something you can call them without a parameter because all they do is call the actual script with a parameter. So you'll see like there's get code and get code from message. All get code does is assume the message you're going to use and then pass it to there. So a lot of it, it came about kind of organically. I'm sure there could be optimizations in the custom functions, but the four that we looked at there are kind of key. Let me whack this into the calculation engine so we can see it a bit more clearly.
I guess the next question that's going to come, preempting it, is are you going to be able to share this with people?
I hope so. I hope to. Yeah, I want to share it in a way that, because it's on Git. Is it me? I know. I want to share it in a way that we can kind of keep the conversation going. So I feel putting it on GitHub is probably the best way. And I think I do have it as a private repository at the moment. So I'll probably just release it. Obviously, I was tweaking it, so I didn't want to release it. But yeah, I think it's, even as a version 0.01, it'll be good. Okay, so let's look at this custom function. I'll zoom in and we can go through it. So it checks for a script error and adds new errors to the result object and returns true if there is no error. It's just complex. I've tried to comment it as much as I can. But yeah, it's a little bit of a mouthful. But the key things it's doing, I can explain. You can dig into the code later. So essentially, it's checking if we've set an error code ourselves. So remember when I said you can decide whenever an error code exists, you just write some code. The crux of that is you're setting error code to a number. That way it'll be detected by this check for error function. So I don't have time to go into the detail, but essentially these usually come from a calculation script, like a set variable step. So I've kind of tried to say if the previous block generated a calculation error, then error code is going to be something. Okay? And then you'll return false because there was an error. There's some kind of Chrome extra stuff here that is a bit more detailed. We have this thing called ignore code, but you can ignore it for now. What we're really saying is if we've generated this variable, then we know there's an error. Second thing is we check for get last error. So this is going to catch your 401 errors, your 101s, any script step that generates an error. If there isn't an error code, it's going to grab that and say, hey, I'm going to return false. Now there's a exception here, which is if you want to ignore the error, and by that I mean don't add the error to the list of errors, then you can do this little I have this little thing going on here, but again, you can ignore it. Essentially what it means is, if you have a get last error, add it to this kind of master error object and return false. So don't allow that try step to run if the last step generated an error. This add message is essentially doing the work of saying, okay, take whatever the code is and add it to my error representation to it, to my result variable. And then finally, oh, and you'll see also, every time one of these happens, we set this flag to true. So error B is saying an error has happened. And the reason we do that is really just to speed things up, so that if these two things aren't true, there's just a really simple Boolean check we can do at the end to see if we have kind of said there's an error here. So it's just if the alternative here is to like query your error object, but that takes time and processing. You want to make this script, this function, which runs a lot, to be super fast. So that's what this does. And finally, if none of those conditions are true, then you can return true and say, hey, there were no errors, go ahead and do your script. So yeah, this is unfortunately just the way custom functions are. They're always quite dense, no matter how much you comment them, but this is just how we're going to have to manage it. So yeah, those are the key custom functions. There's a bunch of other kind of stuff in here. I kind of unfortunately couldn't, I was just building and building and building. I couldn't present a simpler version, so everything is in here. But there are things to deal with JSON errors that get quite gnarly. So there's one cool thing I do want to quickly show, is that if you want to actually generate an error code from a set variable step, you have to make the repetition infinity. So you just divide 1 or any number by 0, and then you'll get error 5 from a set variable step. So I took this to the extreme here. I don't want to do the JSON one. I'll do...
At least you're not using Hans's technique, which is like vlog in.
Yeah, that's the other one, right? That used to be the way. I have used that before. So this will throw an error, but in order for it to work, you have to put the calculation in the repetition calculation. So we do all this. So you put your value calculation in here, and your repetition that you want to set. So you could still set repetition 2 of this variable, that'll work. You add your debugging. This is just a stupid hack to clear out the error that gets thrown. But then at the very end, you'll see it returns the repetition divided by whether or not there was an error. If there was an error, then it's going to divide by 0, and bam, you get the error.
That deserves a comment right there.
Yeah, so this, again, it was quite a recent find, so I didn't get time to like fully think it through. But if you want to, and really the reason you would do this is because you want to get that line number into the error log. Okay, so it's quite extreme. If you're just starting out, you don't need this, because you could just set the error code. But if you want to actually generate a real FileMaker error, have a repetition number divided by infinity and divided by 0, and you're good to go. And so this thing, to actually set the variable value, I just have a custom function that handles all the junk in there. But yeah, that's a pretty cool thing to know.
You outdid Hans.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, he did a...
What Hans used to do is whenever he wanted to write something to the Event.log, he would do a relog in
with a wacky,
that didn't exist, and then he'd get an error, but because the error would then get logged
in the Event.log.
Because you tried to log in, it would get logged in the Event.log, so he could write whatever he wanted.
As the account name, right? To log in.
Yeah,
that's the account name.
You know, system debug or whatever, you know, and then it would write into the Event.log whatever he wanted. Yeah. You can put something in there. So it's his private method of inserting errors and logging them.
And that's super solid, except now that we have the option to get the line number, this preserves the line number, right?
Yeah, so.
You get it all in one.
Combined with on this thing.
You can use that for, it's useful. Error 212 is pretty rare. So.
Yeah.
And this final thing is just a bugbear about JSON, where essentially evaluation error doesn't work on JSON errors. They always return 0. JSON always just returns that stupid question mark star. So I have this other kind of little way of checking. It's not perfect, but if your result, JSON result, the first 2 characters are question mark space, 99.9% of the time that means your JSON's malformed. So we can use this new FileMaker error code, which is 1710, which actually is for, I think, invalid JSON parameter. So that just forces that in there. And then you can, actually being able to write worry-free JSON is quite liberating because we use JSON so much now. If you pass that weird 2-line thing as an object, you can destroy a lot of data pretty quickly, right? You can get into infinite loops because you're trying to loop for an object that's not a valid object. So yeah, you can leave those worries behind. Cool.
Wow.
All right.
Amazing.
So there's my wish list. I put your thing in there, Vince. That was a great idea.
Thank you so much, yeah.
Which one is it?
So Vince is the last one. Centralized script error logging FileMaker server for all clients. So you could just hard switch on, and then even if you have an error in a local client, that error gets logged in one centralized place. So you can see all of those errors. And obviously it would be configurable because it might have a performance impact. But if you could turn it on when you were having issues, for 24 hours, say, you could then gather a lot of useful data.
Centralized where?
FileMaker server. But for me, I'd want it queryable by FileMaker, right? So not hidden away in the way the Event.log is, but actually something that can be queried with a script step would be my ideal.
Any kind of security issues there?
I don't know.
You'd have to manage them for sure.
Very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
But yeah, my wish list, if we could just have get script line number and get script step name, we wouldn't need to worry about the native error log. We wouldn't need it anymore. Get last error line number. Again, that would just, where the line number was, same with last error there. Get last calculation error would mean we wouldn't have to do that weird evaluation error hack to get the calculation engine error code. And last JSON error, oh my God, that would really help. Yeah, so I have some things to think about, and I'll certainly be posting ideas for most of those on the community.
Robert also posted number 1 and number 2, not all script steps have calc dialog to plug the get calc in. Right, and so that's where steps that's where numbers 3 and 4 come in handy, right? So you can say, I couldn't get the script line number. So yeah, I actually added those. I realized the same thing as you, Robert, and was like, oh, I'm going to need these other script steps as well. But yeah, because most of the time your get script step name, for example, is just going to be set variable, because that's the one where mostly you're going to have calculation error number. But yeah. Cool. Great. Well, thank you everyone for staying engaged. I don't do many presentations, so I don't really have the slickness, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you everyone who attended online as well. This meeting was recorded and
it's now going to not be recorded.
What's that?
It's not going to be recorded.
Not being recorded. Okay, not recorded.
Just the end. We're going to stop recording.
Oh, I see.
Oh, did it already?